Great. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's share with Rabbi Liss. It's thematically pre-Chanukah share, but I believe the Rabbi is going to touch on a few different topics. The Rabbi Liss is the Rabbi of Highgate Synagogue. He is also the director of the Center of Rabbinic Excellence. And in addition, he's an advisor both to the Imperial War Museum and to the St. Martin Gilbert Learning Center. And if that wasn't enough, he's also the school Rav for the Shalom Noam Primary School. We're delighted that Rabbi Liss is here with us tonight. I understand he had a special connection with Rabbi Bernstein, Zevron Levracha, and we look forward to hearing from Rabbi Liss.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And in absentia, I want to thank Diane Zobin for asking me to speak this evening. It's Diane Zobin was in the class above me in school, so it was always someone I looked up to and got advice from as a colleague in the rabbinate, and now as one of our Dayanim on the London based in. He's a great source of support to myself, to my colleagues, and it's very much appreciated. And how lucky you are to have him as the Rav of this amazing Kehillah. I think the last time I spoke here was actually on one of Rabbi Bernstein Zatzal's yahrzeit, and so it's another reason it's very special to be here. But I will refer to Rabbi Bernstein a little bit later on one of the ideas that I want to share. So this evening, in the time we have, I want to share a few thoughts related to Chanukah, most of which will be covered in the source sheets. I'm not sure I'll get through everything, but hopefully it gives you material to work with through Chanukah. I just want to share a short but powerful idea to start with, to kick us off. We all know that there's a very famous question that the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Cairo, asks about Chanukah lighting. We celebrate for 8 nights and days due to the miracle of the Shemim, the miracle of the oil burning for 8 rather than 1 night. So the question he asks is, if it had enough oil to last 1 night, therefore the Ness was only 7 days. The Ness wasn't 8 days, the Ness was 7 days. And so in theory, it should be a 7-day festival. We should light for 7 nights. Why do we have 8? And actually, people say the greatest miracle of Chanukah is how many answers there are to this question. Hundreds, if not thousands of answers. But I just want to share one that I heard from Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson. He tells a story of Rav Mendel of Rimanov, whose son came to him in tears. He asked him, "Why are you crying?" And the son said, "I was playing hide and seek with my friends, and I hid in such a good place that they couldn't find me. And they searched and searched, but ultimately they couldn't find my whereabouts." So his father asked him, "I don't understand. Why are you crying? You won the game. That's the objective." He said, "Father, you don't understand. They stopped searching and went to do something else." His father began to cry and lifted his eyes to heaven and says, "Avinu Shebashamayim, Father in heaven, isn't this the story of Jewish history? You hid yourself that we should search for you, but you hid yourself so well that people stopped searching." When the Chashmonaim came into the Beis Hamikdash, it had been ransacked, contaminated. God had been erected, pigs had been slaughtered to that God. All of the jugs of oil had been broken, shattered, and scattered. Everything was chaotic. So under such conditions, who would think to look for a jug of oil that's pure? And yet they searched and searched and eventually found that one little jug that lasted for 8 nights. It goes without saying, but although it needs to be said and reminded, that we are living through such painful and traumatic times. And the suffering is so great that we might stop searching for a jug of oil that is pure and wholesome. It'll be easy to become jaded and give up on our dreams and positive ambitions. And so on the first day of Chanukah, the additional to the other 7, because that's the day that it had enough oil for, we celebrate the human miracle, the courage and conviction and persistence of the human soul. Never give up on our dreams. Never give up on possibility, and never stop searching for that cup of oil that is present. And if you keep searching for the oil, you'll find it. And when you do, you will kindle it, and it will light up your life, and it will light up the world. So 7 lights are for the miracle, for the Ness. The additional one, the first one, is for us. And I think, for me, that's an important way to start thinking about Chanukah in this year of all years. As we are tomorrow morning, will be 2 months on from that dreadful day, what's called in Israel, Hashabbat HaShachor, the Black Shabbos, the 7th of October. And some of the sources will reflect that, because I have the Hilchos Chanukah that have been published by the army for those who are serving in Gaza, and we'll come to that a little bit later on. I'm actually going to start with source 2 on the sheet, because that is where I just left off, talking about the oil. This is a comment, the Gemara, Shabbos Daf Chof Aleph Amud Beis, the Gemara which talks about the halachas of Chanukah. And this is a comment of the Sefer called the Gilyonia Hashas of Rabbi Yosef Engel. And in the printing I have from him is actually taken from Rabbi Bernstein's personal copy of the Sefer, and the notes you can see at the bottom, where he says, 4 lines from the bottom, he says, Ayin Divrei Shaul, and then there's a space, Ala Torah, Mahadura Tinyon, the second edition, Parshas Nasa, Divrei Maskel B'Medrash, and so I looked that up, and that's going to be our source number 3. But we start with source number 2, and he asks, Rav Yosef Engel asks the following question. He said, and Rav Yosef Engel was the Av Bezdin of Krakow. He asked the question, why was the Ness of oil necessary? You go into the Beis HaMikdash, you're allowed back into the Beis HaMikdash. We have a principle of Tumah D'Chuyot B'Tzibur, that when the community, we have it by Korban Pets, when the majority of the community are Tomei, then we can say Tumah D'Chuyot B'Tzibur, so that we don't lose out as a collective. We're not so bothered about, or we can push off the Tumah and allow ourselves to proceed. And we look at this, take it from the top line. The quote of the Gemara is double underlined. Nira Be'enai continues, Marsha Hikshu, that which they've asked, Dilma Hutzra Chanes, Ari Tumah D'Chuyot B'Tzibur, as we just asked. Tumah D'Chuyot B'Tzibur, why do we need the Ness at all? Nira D'Kiven Zahoya Oz Chanukah Sabayis. Here they were rededicating the Beis HaMikdash. Since there was a Chanukah Sabayis, K'mavor b'Maharsha b'Chedushay Agodos, as we see, as the Maharsha says in the Chedushay Agodos. So we're dealing at the time of Chanukah with a dedication, a recommencement of the temple ritual. And as we also see, or can be proven from what we read, the laning that we have on Chanukah, that it's about the setting up of it was the setting up of the Mishkan, with but it's a beginning. Since it's a beginning, it's the outset. You're trying to start something new, setting the scene for that which comes afterwards. Therefore, it needs to be in absolute purity. If you're starting a new venture, you're starting something new. Yes, you have a principle of Tumah D'Chuyot B'Tzibur. You could rely on it, but says Rav Yosef Engel that's inappropriate when you're starting something new. When you begin something, you want to go in the direction that you're going to continue. And if you start it with b'diavad, if you start it without putting the right foot forward, it's going to go wrong as we go down the line. So you want to start as pure as possible. So he says, Lachain, as I just read, Lachain Hutzach Shia B'Tara Gemara, it needs to be with absolute purity, Lo B'Tchias Tumah, not with pushing off the Tumah. V'zel Gam Keimash Mavur B'Balei HaTosfos Ala Torah Parsha Shmini. We also see this a principle brought by Tosfos in Parsha Shmini, where we talk about Krovei Akadosh. There's talking about the setting up of the Beis HaMikdash. The Kohen Hedyot b'yom shenimshach la'avoda also b'tumas krovim. Although a Kohen is allowed to loses one of his 7 relatives, one of his 7 immediate relatives. That's the 2 parents, that's a brother and sister, that's a son and daughter. Those are 6, and then the other one is a spouse. So those are the 7. So a wife. Those are the 7 relatives. A Kohen Hedyot, a regular Kohen, is allowed to become Tomei for them. He says, but there, on the day the Beis HaMikdash was set up, also b'tumas krovim k'Kohen Gadol. He has the status, a Kohen Hedyot has the status of a Kohen Gadol, again, because it's a new beginning, because it's the because it's the beginning of it, and that's why the Krovei Kodesh that's talking about when Nadav and Avihu die, and so therefore it's not Elozah and Isamar, they're two brothers who take them out, who are their immediate Krovim, but rather it's Mishol and El Sofer, and that's because it's the day that these Kohanim began their career. Don't want to rely on the beginnings have to be as pure as possible. He then brings another example from the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Yud Gimel, that talks about asks where the Jewish people, where Klal Yisrael bring the first Omer of barley from, because there's a halacha that if you don't have any in Eretz Yisrael, you're allowed to bring it from Eber Hayarden, from the other side of the River Jordan. That there we say we're now. Oh, I've lost I don't have line numbers here. 1, 2. About 10 lines down towards the end of the line, right in the beginning. We had to be right in the middle of the page. Since the best way of performing this mitzvah is taking the grain from the land of Yehuda, rather than taking it from Ever Hayarden on the other side of Jordan. So therefore, it would be inappropriate. It would be inappropriate to take the first one, not in the best way possible. And so he continues to talk about that. Again, the concept is, why is it that the Nes Shemen occurred? Why do we need the miracle of the oil if we could rely on the concept of Tumah, Tuchuy B'Tzibur? And so the answer given by Rav Yosef Engel is beginnings are so crucial. They must be the best. We've got to try as best as we can to start. And so, continuing on this theme for a little bit more, looking at source 3, because this is where Rabbi Bernstein sent us. As we said at the end of that page, he said, look at the Divrei Shaul, a sefer written by Rav Yosef Shaul Halevi Nathanson, who Rabbi Bernstein often quoted as one of the great poskim of the 19th century. But this is his Sefer Al HaTorah from Parshas Naso. And see, he says that. It says, B'midrash Parshas Zayin, he says, Chavivim Heim Yisrael. Yisrael are beloved. Sha'afal pi shehem Tameim, even though they are Tomei, Hashchina Beinoisam, the Shchina rests among them. Shneim Hashochin Itam B'soch Tum Oisam. So Hiksha Hayedei Moshe, Zim Kain Heicha Omru Mishkan Eidus Hu L'Yisrael Shavita Lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Amaisa Ego. So why is it that we refer to the Mishkan Eidus, and there it's saying that Eidus about Yisrael Shavita Lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Amaisa Ego, HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgave us for the sin of the golden calf, for Chet HaEgel. We've just said that the Shechina was amongst them, even though they were Tomei. So why did they need to be? Why did it need to be Batara? Well, Lefiani Hastati says the Divrei Shaul, in my humble opinion, but Pshit's lo kosher, it's not a question. The Shani Hascholas Hadava Shu Tzarech Inyan Godel Mekayim Hadava. The beginning of something, again, the same principle. It's a very important thing that you get things right. So when you're starting a new venture, the idea is the same. When you're starting a new venture, starting it, whether it's a new job or a new school or a new career or a new or a marriage or whatever it might be that you're starting afresh, and you say the Halimot, whatever it is you're starting, or a new Yom Tov, you're rededicating the Beis Hamikdash, something you're doing at the outset, you want to get it as right as possible. And so that's why we needed the Nes of the Pach Hashem, and it wasn't good enough to rely on the principle of Tumah Tuchuy B'Tzibur, because beginnings are crucial. They must be the best. Okay, that's the idea that I heard from Rabbi Bernstein. I wanted to share from his very own sefer. I want to go back to source 1. Source 1 is the Rambam. The Rambam's introduction to Hilchos Chanukah. And what's interesting here is in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, in Hilchos, so you have Hilchos Megillah and Chanukah together in the same Sefer. Hilchos Megillah takes the first 2 Parokim, and Chanukah is Parokim Gimel, Dalet, and Hey. And unlike his introductions to all the other Yomim Tovim, the Rambam goes into a history lesson. And we'll see in a few minutes from Rav Soloveitchik why he does that. But let's have a look. We'll go through these three halachas fairly speedy. So it's source 1, Rambam Hilchos Megillah v'Chanukah Perek Gimel Halacha Aleph. But by Shein in the second temple period, Kshemalchu Yovom Gozru Gezeres Al Yisrael, when the Greeks ruled, they passed various gezeres against the Jewish people, Votli Dosam, and tried to destroy their religion. And they didn't allow us to learn Torah or practice mitzvahs. They guided us in all directions, the money, the daughters, and they came into the Beis HaMikdash, they broke things down, and they were matame, things that were tahor. They caused a lot of pain and a lot of pressure. Saved us. And the Chashmonaim, who were Kohanim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them the strength. They saved us. And from that moment onwards, over the next 200, for at least the next 200 years, we had Jewish Malchus in Eretz Yisrael until the second Chut. Halacha Beis. And when the Jewish people were successful, they overcame their enemies on the 25th of the month of Kislev. They entered the Beis HaMikdash, as we've said, they could only find one jug of oil, and had enough. Bilvad only had enough to light for one night. Until they were able to get to where the olive groves were. No, not olive groves. Where the olive groves were, to prepare olive oil and bring that back to the Beis HaMikdash, which was an 8-day round trip to go the journey, prepare the oil, and bring it back. Final halacha for now. So the Chacham of that generation established tomorrow night. Yemei Simcha v'Halel. These are days. We've got to remember what the purpose of these days that they are. Yemei Simcha v'Halel. These are days of joy and celebration. Madlikim bohen haneres ba'erev al pischa bottom, and we light Chanukah lights at the entrance to our homes. B'chol laila v'alei, each night. Mishmonas haleilos laharis v'legalos hanes, to display and reveal the miracle. And we call them Chanukah. We don't give Hespedim on Chanukah. There's no fasting on Chanukah. And the lighting of the candles is a rabbinic mitzvah at the same status as reading the Megillah on Purim. So why did I read that all out? That's not. It's a rhetorical question. So you don't have to. No, I'm fine, thank you. Let's try and find my next piece of paper. So Rav Soloveitchik asks, why does the Rambam preface the halachas of Chanukah with a detailed historical summary when he doesned do this before any of the other Yomim Tov? What is so special about Chanukah, and why does he go to such detail, and therefore why did I read it out? Well, we'll see in the answer why I might have done. So I once thought, and I don't remember the source of this, but in 1986 there was an experiment where researchers wanted to see how important details are in a story. They simulated a courtroom and tested how much would the jurors be affected by the details of the testament. Subjects were asked to play the role of jurors and were given the transcript of a fictitious trial to read. The jurors were then asked to assess the fitness of a mother, Mrs. Johnson, and to decide whether her 7-year-old son should remain in her care. All the jurors heard the same arguments. The only difference was the level of detail in those arguments. In one experimental group, all the arguments that supported Mrs. Johnson had some vivid detail, whereas the arguments against her had no extra details. They were pale by comparison. The other group heard the opposite combination. As an example, one argument in Mrs. Johnson's favor said, Mrs. Johnson sees to it that her child washes and brushes his teeth before bedtime. In the vivid form, the arguments added a detail. He uses a Star Wars toothbrush that looks like Darth Vader. Okay. Even though the details should not have mattered, they did. Jurors who heard the favorable arguments with vivid details judged Mrs. Johnson to be a more suitable parent than did jurors who heard the unfavorable arguments with vivid details. The details had a big impact. Writing before this experiment took place, but I think with a similar and much more important concept, Rav Soloveitchik explains that knowledge of the events is indispensable halachically for the perfect fulfillment of the mitzvahs of Chanukah. The Rambam in the next parak, in Parak Dalet, Halacha Yud Beis, emphasizes that the precept of candle lighting is rooted in the idea of halal v'hodah, in the mitzvah of praise and gratitude. The technical performance, the Maisa Hadloka, consists of lighting a candle. The Kiyum HaMitzvah, the genuine fulfillment, expresses itself in an experience of gratitude, which manifests itself in a physical act. If we're indeed to experience gratitude, it's necessary to know for what we are grateful, for what we want to praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Therefore, says Rav Soloveitchik, knowledge of the story is essential to be Mekayim the mitzvah. And so, unlike other mitzvahs, where that doesn't apply, other Maisa mitzvahs doesn't apply, here, to fulfill, as we said, the Kiyum HaMitzvah of giving, HaKoras HaTov, of giving thanks, if you want to express thanks well and appropriately, you need to know what you're giving thanks for. And so therefore, when we're getting ready to light, or if we're sharing the concept of Chanukah with people around us, share the details. Share the details of the Chanukah story, as you might remember it as the Darth Vader toothbrush moments, so we can express an even a greater appreciation for the Nissim HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for us. So let's have the details. And talking about Bayomim Hahem Bazman Hazeh, again, I'm moving around because I want to. The next part is, for me at the moment, is the most important, but there are other sources here as well. I was very privileged about 2 weeks ago now to go with 7. There were 8 of us who went on a trip to Eretz Yisrael. We went on a solidarity trip to Israel for 36 hours with the United Synagogue. There were 4 Rabbonim, a Rebbetzin. We actually got two sons serving in the IDF, and 3 of the leaders of the United Synagogue. And the 8 of us went for 36 hours. So for those of you who are on LinkedIn, I posted a review of it. And things we saw there will stay with us for a long time. The country, as you can imagine, is suffering deep trauma. But the resilience, on the other hand, is astonishing. So much so that we were talking to the mother of a hostage who comes from Kibbutz Kfar Aza, so saw the most horrendous things. In the middle of the conversation, we're talking to her, we're trying to learn about her daughter, trying to give her chizuk. Turns around to us, she says, but that's my story. It's much worse for you. You're living in England. How are you coping? And that was extraordinary. But there is deep trauma, and Israel will need a lot of help, particularly with its youth, to recover afterwards. And we done firstly for victory, for destruction of Hamas, and safety for everyone in Eretz Yisrael. We're thinking about our holy brothers and sisters serving in the army, and we're thinking of course, the hostages and davening for the rest of them to be released speedily and in good health. So I want to share one of the stories that we came across when we were there. I'll just give a brief overview of some of the things we did, and then I'll tell you a story about a particular soldier. But when we arrived, we took the overnight El Al flight. Well, you can only take El Al flights at the moment. But we took the overnight flight, and we landed at 4 in the morning. It took us an hour to clear customs because we brought 20 plus suitcases of aid that was requested, and so we brought that with us. And then we went to a yeshuv called Yad Binyamin, to daven Shachris, and there we had breakfast and spoke to Rabbi Doron Perez, the CEO of World Mizrachi, who is also one of his sons is missing, presumed hostage, and we daven for his return, Daniel Shimon ben Sharon, and he spoke to us quite amazingly, firstly about the importance of the achdus that's been created in the Jewish world. As Rabbi Aubrey Hirsch said on one of his podcasts recently, and I highly recommend his podcast, History for the Curious, he said, he wants to know what Jewish achdus is. We can't think of a time in Jewish history when everybody in the Jewish world has been davening for the exact same thing. Anywhere there is a Jew in the world, we are all davening for the exact same thing, and that power is palpable. And given the splits in Israel beforehand, it's very much appreciated then. So we need to try to do our best to extend that. But from there we went to a place called Machane Shura, the camp Shura, which is where the Israeli rabbinate, their seat is, their army bases, and that is where also there is a tahara room. That it was a very large tahara room, the tahara rooms, and that is where any soldier who is killed in action, they are taken to there to be identified and then to be prepared for kfura. That's in peace times. In war times, civilian casualties are taken there as well. So you can imagine, we can't imagine what the scenes were at that base from October the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, what they had to deal with. And, one thinks often that the shilas were asked, and the Gemaras that talk about how you identify people, the shilas that we heard, and I'm not the place to repeat it now, certainly not without a trigger warning, we don't need any proof to know the savagery that took place on October the 7th and in the coming days. Every piece of what we would have thought academic learning on that subject was needed, Lemaisa, and those people, those soldiers who dealt with, we met people. There were people from Zaka, people from Hatzolah, Magen David Adom, the people in the army. What they had to do with it was we met with Maloche Hashem Tzavakos. They were amazing people. So Machane Shura, this camp, and there are online. You can see there are interviews with some of the Rabbanim at the camp, and you can see what they at that base and what they do, what they take care of. But one of the things they do there is they publish the halachas for people in the army. And I have it on source 5, just a nice big picture. It says halacha kasidra, Chanukah charvois barzel. Swords. The operation is called swords of iron. This is the thing, and you can see the various badges of the army underneath. This is the official army publication. So it's and we think, and we sat actually with the team there, and we think it's a Shomer Shabbos army. The army operates al pi halacha, and so has to think of it. We went into one warehouse, which is possibly the largest Aron Kodesh in the world. There are thousands of Sefer Torah then, and when units go out, they want to take a Sefer Torah with them and have a Sefer Torah in their camp. So what's interesting, we'll look at in a moment, some of the halachas of Chanukah that have been published this week, so we can, in some sense, be feeling it a little bit more, be thinking about the soldiers as they're going into battle, what they're going through, and we daven for them, and hopefully that'll increase our tefillas for them. But before I go through some of this, and to say 2 more things. Number one, it means I probably won't get a chance to go through the tshuva I printed. It just doesn't say the title. The tshuva on the following pages is written. It's called Shalos Tshuvas B'Hilchos Chanukah Siman Vav Hadloka B'Makim Tziburi. This is a tshuva from Rav Osher Weiss. It just doesn't have the name on it. So if you look at that afterwards, that's who wrote the tshuva. And that's an interesting question about what do you do if you've got you want to light Chanukah candles at work or in a public place or a wedding. Those are in a shul. Those are the principles. Al pi halacha, and I just double check that this is Dayan Zobin's ruling for the shul, is that in shul and at home is where we say that those are the two places we light with a bracha. Everything else is discussed on a case-by-case basis. But he goes through about why do we say a bracha on Hadlokas HaNeros in shul as well, because that itself is a shaila, because we say Ner Ishu Beso should be written lit at home, and that's something we're going to look at in a moment when we deal with the army. But I want to tell you a story of a soldier we met called Yossi, just to give you and so many Yossis out there, but just the caliber of person we're talking about. So he told us, we went to see him there's a rehabilitation center in Ra'anana called Beit Levenstein. And we went to see him, and he said to us that he was called to duty on the 7th of October. He was called to Kibbutz Be'eri to try and defend the kibbutz. By the time he got there, he said they were very focused on what they were doing, but they could see in the peripheral vision all the horrors that were going on. But they were focused, and he said his unit, and they found this out the next day because they were able to, when they cleared up the thing, they killed 140 to 150 terrorists. The numbers are extraordinary. He said at the same time, they also rescued 25 families containing 70 people who had already been taken, who were being taken away to be taken hostage. So the numbers are gefährlich as they are. We started with 240. It started as much higher than that. But Baruch Hashem, some were saved. So Yossi was part of this unit. But in the middle of the operation, he was shot in his legs. He was shot in his legs, and he was in the field. He said it was already dark, but he was there like a sitting duck, and they were being shot at by the enemy. And he turned to his one-up step in command, the person above him, and said, can you do something? Please help me, get me off the field. But there are rules of war. You can't do that because that puts everyone else's lives at risk. They have to continue the fight. So he was left there as a sitting duck. And he said to us, so he turned to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, he said, Kriya Shema. He said, Vidui. And then, I mean, just the presence of mind. And then he said, the tefillah that we say every night before going to bed of Harini Moichel, he had the presence of mind to think he wanted to forgive everyone at this moment, because he knew that the end was coming. And then he said, Rabbi Shalom, I know that I don't deserve to be saved, but please, in the merit of my wife, who's a tzaddikas, and our 5 children, please save me. And then he said three malachim came and fought off the terrorists, and his life was saved, and he was sitting in hospital. And he said to us, and since then he's tried every so often to try and learn something, because we saw Gemara on his bedside table. And it was Daf Yomi. He said he was trying to learn Gemara. He said, but every time he tries to concentrate on anything, anytime he closes his eyes, now all he can see are the scenes that were his peripheral vision when he was focused on fighting, and so he just couldn't concentrate. But he said, "I'm so pleased you came today, because today I phoned the rabbi of the hospital, and I said I have to have a chavrusa." So he said just before we came, he'd learnt the daf of the day, and he was very pleased to be able to do this. That's the story. Anyway, I go back to London, and something was bothering me about the story, because he said he was in Kibbutz Be'eri, saved by soldiers. And I know that there's a member of our Kahila in Highgate whose cousin was an army officer, and Rahman al-Islam was killed defending Kibbutz Be'eri. But the family had heard that he had done some heroic acts before he was killed. And so we sent a message. I got my Kafrus who'd taken down his number, sent a WhatsApp message to the soldier in Beit Levenstein and said, "Did you know of this this soldier called Roy Negri? Hashem Yinkom Domo?" And he said, "I didn't know him personally, but I know that he was one of the Malachim who saved my life." And so, an incredible story. And there, I was able to share that with the family of Roy Negri, and they found great nacham in that. So this is the quality of people we're talking about. These are the people we're davening for. And so it doesn't surprise us that they want to know how to observe Chanukah while serving in the army. So let's look here where you've got the page after that picture, which of lighting. There you have Hilchos Chanukah with an emblem at the top, and we'll see. I think I've got about 10 minutes left, so I will choose various selections here. Yeah. So reading from the top here, Hilchos Chanukah, Tiknu Chachomim es Shmonos Yimei Chanukah Kimei Halel v'Hodah. As we saw before, Chachomim established the 8 days of Chanukah. They should be days of Halel and Hodah. Al Nitzochem b'Milchama leYavonim, over the war of defeating the Greeks. L'zechanes Pach Hashem and B'Tiyar HaMikdash, and to remember the miracle of the oil and the purification of the Beis HaMikdash. V'tzivu lahadlik bohen neiros midei erev lefiros samhanis. And the Chachomim established the mitzvah to light Chanukah lights every night. Kebayomim haheim, as in those days, kach bizman hazeh, so too now. Oimdim lochmei Yisrael ba'oize b'gvura, the defenders of Israel are standing with strength. Umavtichem sha'or yigaber ala choshech, and we have bitochin, or we're promised that the light will defeat the darkness of Ezras Hashem, with the help of Hashem. Meshivim melchama v'chol hakomim aleinu l'ra, will defeat all of those who come against us with evil intent. And so now we go actually into Hilchos Chanukah. We start, he says, Hachayovim v'hadloka, who are those who are chayav in the Hilchos Hadloka, and he says mitzvahs Chanukah ner yishuv beiso, each person according to their home. And then in the second paragraph there it says b'shas tzchak nitin listapek beidlakas ner echad kol yom v'kol echad, which is why we like one night each night. Filu b'ner echad kol yom, each night one for each person, or the more b'diavad case you write one for everybody. Then he talks about the difference between Ashkenazim and Sephardim. The next paragraph, which starts in red, he says Hashoya Babossis, someone who is actually on the base, on an army base. That's obviously going to be a little bit easier, because that's where you're sleeping, that's where you're living, that's where you're eating. And they go into talk different places. I want to take you to page 4. So one of the more surprising halachas. Whereas the second paragraph down, where it says Chiyuv hadloka l'shohim b'ma'ahel zmani u'v'shitchei kinus. What's the obligation of lighting for those who are either in a temporary abode, like a tent, or something like that? And he says as follows: chayolim Hashem b'mekomes harum l'megurim. The soldiers who are in places where it's appropriate to live. Even if it's just temporary, if it's a ma'al, if it's a tent which is in the entrance area of the place. Berekem, I had to look this one up. Berekem is a rechev kirvei mushraim, which is an armored combat vehicle. Berekem is an armored combat vehicle. Over batani shmira, or in guard huts. V'yesh omrim, in the brackets, af bo'ohele sayorim v'schochos. Those are different types of tents or little huts. Yadliku b'brocha. They should light Chanukah lights with a brocha. Elim ken yotzim b'hadloka shebeis mishpachtam. Unless at home, they've got family at home, they're not by themselves, they've got family at home who are lighting, they can rely on that lighting, because at the end of the day we say ner ish ubeis. But matzom melu, in these such cases, yesh lahakbed lanech es haner b'mokem she'nikar sheloi hidlikuhu letzorchi ta'ura. It's really important that it's put in a place where it's obvious that it's there for Chanukah and not for giving light. Because if the purpose is for Pirsum HaNes, you want to magnify and display the nest, the miracle. If it looks like it's just light to give you light, that's not appropriate. And then the next one, it says, what about lighting in the house of the enemy. It says, "Chayolim ha'oiskim belechima p'tzurim ad lokas neres Chanukah." A soldier is actually involved in fighting, is potter, is relieved of their halachic duties. They're involved in the mitzvah, involved in the mitzvah of protecting Klal Yisrael. Imzos, having said that, what is possible we should try and do? Amazing. What is possible we should try and do, provided that you're not putting yourself in any danger. And if he gets permission from a commander, and a samach aleph lamed is a skan aleph, which is a lieutenant colonel. Rishoim lahad, I think. Rishoim lahadlik ner Chanukah b'bayis sheshahu boy b'meshach hayom. You can light Chanukah lights in the house where you are. There for a day, so they could be in the middle of Gaza. If they've taken over a house, they can light the Chanukah lights for that day. And he points out different Ashkenazim father af levarech al hadlaka. You can even light with a bracha. So it's just, I think this whole concept is amazing for us here. Just contemplate what is going on in Israel, Gaza, the northern border as well, and just to have a sense of achdus, a sense of care and love for our soldiers. And this is what they're thinking of. This is what they're thinking of. For Yossi, the fact that he wasn't able to learn Gemara, and for and there are a whole range of soldiers, but they're all involved in protecting Eretz Yisrael. They're protecting Klal Yisrael from the enemy. And we've seen today more examples: the silence of the world from all the horrendous rapes and so forth that took place on October the 7th, that all these Me Too movements around the world just completely ignored. And then the heads of what are considered the bastions of education. I think it's not a surprise happening around Chanukah. This is the greatest educational institutes in America, and the heads of them can't call out when they're asked whether calling for intifada against Jews, whether that's considered harassment and bullying of Jewish students. If you haven't seen that yet, that you will do. That's very much live at the moment. This is the world we're living in at the moment, and you compare that. We think of our chayalim who are fighting. Let me just finish by going through a few of these halachas just in a little bit more detail, but it's not inside the not inside. So the question was, how do those living in tents fulfill the mitzvah of lighting Neros Chanukah? Mitzvah is based on Ner Ishul Beso, and so it needs to have the status of a bias. How do you define a bias? So Reb Shalom Mordechai Shwadron, who was the Marasham in his Tshuvas, discusses whether someone traveling overnight on a train should light Chanukah candles. Famous Tshuva. And he rules that since the passenger rented the space on the train, it's considered his home and he should light his candles there. Based on this, the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg Zatzal, who I had the privilege to meet, concludes that someone who is hiking overnight can also light Chanukah candles, since you do not need a fixed home for the mitzvah. Even if you sleep in a tent on a hiking trail, you can also light Chanukah candles there. And you can see where this is going for army purposes. The Tzitz Eliezer goes further and argues that even if you sleep in a field under the sky without any house or tent, you also light Chanukah candles there. However, Rabbi Yosef Shalom Eliashiv Zatzal, I also had the privilege to meet, understands Rav Shadron's ruling differently. He says the Marasham was discussing someone who takes a train ride that goes for 2 or 3 days, as was common. And so the passenger pays for a bed in a specific room in an overnight car for an extended period of time. Such a room has more permanence, allowing a person to establish residence there. This is different from someone riding the train for a few hours at night, and so Rabbi Yosef would not allow someone who's hiking to light Chanukah candles. The Sephardi chief rabbi Rav Yitzchak Yosef quotes these two opinions and follows the former view, based on the conclusion of his father Rav Avadi Yosef, that this is the majority opinion. Therefore, Rav Yitzchak Yosef permits soldiers who are at their guard posts to light Chanukah candles. In contrast, Rav Yosef Svi Rimon, one of the Rabbanim in Gush, the Rav Kehillah there, says that most authorities follow Rabbi Yosef and do not allow people to light Chanukah candles without a home. And so then there is a whole discussion about how larger this tent has to be, whether you can light in an overnight tent that you're moving from place to place. But interesting, in a sefer called Hilchos Tzava, we'll finish with this, Rav Zechariah ben Shlomo rules that fully enclosed military vehicles, provided they have a roof, can constitute a home if a soldier sleeps in it. So if a soldier is going to sleep in a tank or in an armored personnel carrier, he may light Chanukah candles with a bracha. But he does add that if you're in such a vehicle, be very careful from a safety perspective about where you light. You would not, as he writes, you don't want to set military equipment on fire. And again, this is all based on them not having someone lighting at home, because if you do, you can rely on that. I just think, firstly, I love these shilas, and it's worth looking through another time, looking through the Maharsham, look through about his whole diyun about train rides. It's worth looking at Rav Asher Weiss's about the halachos of public places. It's not really public places. The tshuva is about shul, to understand why we like the bracha and shul, and then he develops that to talk about the question is of someone who was at work with people less from, not lighting at home, can he light for them in the office space? And you can look at that tshuva there. So what I wanted to share with you tonight were a couple of hopefully uplifting ideas about Chanukah, some new ideas hopefully, but also a sense of where we are in Jewish history. It's amazing that in the times of the Chashmonaim, that was might have been the last time we had to think about the halachas of armies, maybe later with Bar Kochba. But since then, when were we thinking about the halachas of Jewish armies until 75 years ago? And now, Rahman al-Islam, it's very real. It's very real. We need to daven, we need to learn, we need to do whatever we can to support Israel. But at the same time, at least to have that sense of brotherhood and sisterhood with those fighting, and just amazing that they are worried about these things and thinking about how to fulfill their mitzvahs even when they're in danger, which I find inspiring. And that should, amidst Hashem, through the light of the Chanukah candles, and just that, as we said at the beginning of those Hilchos Tzava, Tzahal, we should the light should overcome the darkness. The Rishonim, Biyad, Tzadikim should be fulfilled b'mhera v'yomeinu Amen. I wish everyone a lechtige Chanukah. You can at the end.
Thank you very much, Al.